nature of audio comparisons is that the results presented in this video are fully subjective. They are based on my equipment in my listening room using my hearing capability. Therefore, your results may be different. My effort here is to provide you the relative difference of audio characteristics across various pressings. Well, I have my special guest, Brad, today. Brad Vinyl Rush. How you doing, Brad?
Good, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me. I know you're on the road. You were
Yes, sir.
just here with me Saturday night, and now you're out and about on the East Coast. So life moves on.
Yep, jet setting.
Jet setting, it is. Speaking of jet, we are going to be doing a review of Band on the Run by Paul McCartney and Wings. This album is a classic. I think it easily can be called that. And Brad's a lover of this record. He provided 4 of the 5 that we used for this. So thank you for that. We've kind of had this one marinating in the background for a while to get together to do. And finally, we're able to do that. So tell me your backstory on this record.
Yeah, it's by far my favorite, Paul McCartney solo album, even though it's under the Wings moniker. It's definitely my favorite. I think that the first side of that is just nonstop great tunes. And the second side is strong too. But yeah, it's definitely my favorite. I feel like, it's one that I know really well. And that's obviously really good fodder for shootouts, right? If you know a record really well, you know all of the subtle nuances and things that you know what to listen
Right.
for, and there's been quite a few pressings that have been done over the years, obviously with this, and yeah, so the time was right, and we actually have a bonus entry
We
in
do.
the amongst the panel too that we'll talk about as well. That I
Yeah,
think was
and
also interesting.
yeah, and it's not on vinyl. That's a clue for you.
Yeah,
But now that you
exactly.
say the thing about Wings, I want to say my copy, the Half Speed Master CBS, when I was putting that in the rack and pulling it out, and you realize there's no band name on the cover. It's just Band on the Run. The spine says Paul McCartney and Wings.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, so it was the moniker still was there. So I still have that one I put it under P for Paul because that's what it is. But so
Yeah.
we do have an extra beyond the 5 vinyls and vinyls. Did I say vinyls? Oh, no,
Whoa.
not vinyls.
Pressings. Right.
Freudian slip.
Yeah.
Freudian slip. But so general impressions here are, for me, at the end of the day, most of it made sense, but there are a few outlier type things that came out. One that especially did poorly, tragically did poorly.
Hmm.
One that had a different decibel difference from one side of the record to the other compared to the other 3. And it
Hmm.
was just a little bit weird, or actually the other 4, because only one of them had any deviation, and it was just on one side of the record. Really odd. So these are,
Yeah.
the things you pick up when you do it this way, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like you could take any of these, on their own, stand alone, and okay, you absorb it and whatever. But when you start to compare it, it becomes obvious in a lot of cases. Now there were a few that were pretty close, but at the same time, I think we came out with what we thought was the clear winner, and that's always good to have, and by a margin decent enough to say, okay, the one that was in second place actually, in my mind, had that anomaly we talked about. And
Hmm.
I don't know how to rate that anomaly because it's not really a category, but it is something to note and think about and be aware of. So we
Yeah.
have some weirdness. What were any surprises on your end?
Well, I think that was the oddity with that one. And, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, you just adjust the volume, but it was just weird. Um, but I think that one in particular was the one that was the most surprising to me. I didn't expect it to come in second.
Okay.
And I think the other great thing that we'll get into this is what we thought was the winner is one of the cheapest ones you can get,
Yeah.
which is great.
It's always good
Um,
news.
yeah, yeah. So
It's always good news.
so that was kind of surprising, and I think yeah, how poor one of them was, and then how poor another one of them was too. In
Yeah.
terms of
Right.
the results. It just kind of thought that they would fare better, and it's like we always say: if you listen to them in isolation, you probably say, "Gee, well, that sounds pretty good." Until you have your setup where you got two identical turntables, cartridges, etc., and you can go back and forth and really hear those differences. Um, that's when it really becomes stark. And, the one thing that we did here too, and I think it's important for people to know is I didn't know which one was being played.
That's true.
So,
Yeah.
so David put the records on the tables and he knew which ones were on there, but I didn't. So I was blinded to what was being played on which turntable. So, which is always advantageous.
Yeah. That's a great point. And the other beauty of it is I get to sit there and watch Brad's face when they switch. And he's like, huh?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What happened to the treble?
Yeah. What happened? Yeah. Or yeah, whatever it might be. Right. Yeah. Bottom
Yeah.
end, whatever it is.
Yeah. Whatever it
Um,
is.
yeah. I mean, and then, I sometimes I'll hand him the remote and he's going back and forth and just scratching his head too. So it's very entertaining for me when someone else is there to do it as well.
Yeah. But
you
I
know,
love being able to do that, just switch back and forth because you can really hone in on a certain thing for a
yeah.
little bit and, listen for the differences. And then you go back and say, okay, I'm going to listen to, the bass on this one and then go back and forth. And, it just makes it a lot easier to compare, from that standpoint.
Yeah, I have talking to a friend the other day who was trying to compare a few records just by, listening to them. And then he goes, yeah, and I had to pull back to just play a track as opposed to the whole side and go, I'm like, yeah, I mean, yeah, even remembering a track is tough.
Yeah.
Um, y- you know,
Auditory memory we know is
yeah,
notoriously poor. It's
yeah,
really bad.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I started that way, and I immediately said, I got to put up a better way than this. This is
Mhm.
just you feel like you may be fooling yourself, and it just at that point you start to realize that that's not really going to give you enough credence behind the findings that you end up with. So this one, I find is pretty foolproof in terms of doing it. So it's good to have somebody else involved and see it and participate in it as well to both to validate the process, but also to share the music, and then, like I said,
Mhm.
5 out of 6 of the pieces of material here were his. The only one was mine was actually the CBS half speed
Mhm.
because back then, I was mainly if they came out on an audiophile version, that's the one I got. I
Yeah.
didn't even mess around at the time, a lot of times getting an OG because these were coming out somewhat simultaneously
Mhm.
at the time. Now this particular record were a lot of years apart, and I think I gave my sister my original back when I got this one. So I used to do that as well. And
Mhm.
back when I was only keeping one copy of a record, God knows that's not happening anymore.
Well, it is in this case, though, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. In this case, sure, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It,
Yeah,
it worked out perfectly, really, because you had the one that I don't have, and I had
yeah,
all of the other ones. So it was,
yeah,
yeah, it worked out.
yeah. So
So,
with that, let's go ahead and get into the numbers,
yeah,
and which pressings. So why don't you can you read these off? Or you good to see it?
sure, sure, yeah.
I've got a light a little bit in my eyes, and I don't. It's a little glary for me. So
Okay, yeah, I see it. Great. So, yeah, of course, the logical, one of the logical choices would be a U.S. first pressing, and that was mastered by Wally Trowgett. And that was, you see there, the release year was the year that came out. That was the first contender. Next was a UK first pressing. Don't know who the mastering engineer was on that. We looked, couldn't find it anywhere. If somebody knows who was mastering for Apple EMI at that time,
Now this
please.
would be CBS, actually.
CBS, yeah.
This
At
would be
that time,
CBS.
yeah, in the UK, definitely let us know in the comments. The third was your CBS half speed master. They're mastered by Vlado Miller and pressed at Columbia Terre Haute. The fourth one was the 2017 reissue that was remastered at Abbey Road. The mastering engineer is not specified there. Same thing. We looked, couldn't find it. If somebody knows, has some insights there, please share. And then finally, the 50th anniversary Abbey Road half speed master. I got the it's not a box set. It kind of is. It comes with an extra record in it and a pretty nice sleeve. Although you can get that on its own now, just as the half speed pressing on its own. But that was pressed at Optimal and mastered by Miles Showell there. And then you see the non-vinyl comparator, which was the DCC Gold CD that came out in 1993 that was mastered by Steve Hoffman. And, a lot of those DCC CDs and, for that matter, vinyl pressings are very well thought of. Not all, but a lot of them are. So we thought it'd kind of be fun to throw that into the mix and kind of see how it stacked up.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing I want to mention before we get is the half speed master. It talks about them using what's a disk computer system here. Now, that was used to drive the head of the cutter, and it didn't provide the audio source for it. That was analog. That came in analog to actually, go through to get to the cutter in terms of the sonics and the music. But what drove it physically to do it was, in fact, this digitized signal of the record that was driven on computer. And so it's just to be clear, it's analog audio content driven by a digital file that drove the computer head. So just to get that one out of the way in case anybody wondered on it. So
do you know, David, if that's the case with all of those CBS half speed masters or just some
pretty
of them?
much, yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much.
I know we've you and we have done lots of shootouts that include the, pressings from, those CBS half speeds. Wish You Were Here, Boston, Self-Titled, for example. It's interesting to see the difference in the results. Like sometimes they're really good and sometimes they're not so good, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And, that kind of is the moniker for most things when you come down to it, really.
Mm-hmm.
I could say the same thing about Abbey Road half-speed masters. I could say the same thing about Mobile Fidelity or MFSL half-speed. There's the 80-20 rule, kind of thing. And then there's some that, there's a dependency of, who the mastering engineer was, for example, right? I mean, so we know Friday Music, some of the early stuff was Kevin Gray and that, and then, those mastering engineers started to not be used, and Joe went and started doing his own work, and some of those aren't nearly as profound as the other ones. So devil's always in the details when it comes down to it. So
yep, and it's a
and
good lesson on it. It's down to the individual title, right? You can't
it is,
generalize.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So that on that last item there for the vinyl with the box, the standard 50th anniversary LP on its own probably about half that price.
Hmm.
So, but I put it in because that's what we used from that set. But all of these, you see between $30 and $60. So not high dollars. And when I look these up, I always look for at least minimum VG plus cover and record. So don't come back and say, well, I can find one for 10 or $12. Well, maybe you can, but I'm not sure what the condition of that is or whatever. So we're trying to say a decent one because we're comparing it in a lot of cases to a brand new one. So
Hmm.
we wanted to, at least have a shot at it. So you see the prices that are there, and now the relative dB and all these were the same, really, except for that 2017, which only had an issue on one side. And it's weird. Don't get it. We went and I tried it several times. I even flipped turntables to validate that that was the case, and it just was. I'm not here to explain why. I don't know why, but it was, and it could have been the setting error that was made when the second cut was done. Who knows? I don't know,
Yeah.
but
I'd be
that's
interested to
what it
see
is.
if anybody else has this and has experienced the same thing. Uh,
Yeah,
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 just
that
out of
would be interesting.
curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I should probably also mention what songs we sampled.
sure. Go ahead.
We listened to Band on the Run, of course, the opening track there, Jet and Bluebird, and a little bit of Let Me Roll It as well. So
Right.
pretty much side one kind of
I
focused really on that, but a little bit on side two as well with,
I
with
did, especially I
1985,
did
right?
19. Yeah, I did 1985 was
Yeah.
one on side two we used for that,
Yep.
which is actually the last song on the record
Hmm.
because it has the Band on the Run outro reprise at the end of that song, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the real primary songs that people are familiar with on it.
Hmm.
So the quietness of the vinyl, the quote unquote noisiest one was the U.S. original, followed by the British one. It was 8.5, a little bit better. The CBS was very quiet, as they tend to be. They did get that right pretty much across the board at a 9.5. And then the 17 was a little bit noisier. It was more like the UK, 8.5. And then the 50th was a 9. It was pretty good, but I think the CBS was the quietest of them all
Yep.
in that area. So, as it relates to that, then going into the sonics, and just to repeat, these three categories, a bass, mid, and treble, they are the contributors to the sonics average, along with the dynamic range, soundstage and imaging, and voices. So everything but the vinyl. But really, this paints a picture for where the strengths and the weaknesses were in these areas of the record. So, the first one, and Brad, I'll let you take over, but it was a Wally, so we walked into it, with the normal expectations, I would say. What do you say, Brad?
Yeah. I mean, it was. I think we had it up against the CBS half speed initially, and there was a stark difference between the two. And you can see the ratings. It's just the CBS half speed was, the bass was better. It was punchier. The highs were much, much more, much stronger for sure.
A tad
And
too
I think,
strong, maybe?
yeah, and that's the funny thing. Like I think everybody can see the 10.5, which based on David's rating scale is not good. That usually means that something is over the top. And it's funny because it's one of those situations where you're listening to it and at first it sounds really good. It's like, wow, that's really crisp. I can hear, so much detail and the ping on the cymbals, etc. But then after a while, it gets fatiguing. And I think that's where we landed ultimately, is just the
Yeah,
more we listened to it and
yeah,
compared it to some of the others, it's like, wow, that's kind of wearing my ears out. And to the
yeah,
point where, if I'm going to pull one off the shelf, this is probably not going to be it unless you're somebody that just loves those crisp highs and, maybe there's differences in your system and maybe it's not so, um, such so sharp in that way, or kind of fatiguing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where that came out. It was interesting.
Yeah. We went back to that number several times. To the point of where, and then when the UK went against it, I think that was where it really got defined. We said, this porridge is pretty much just right, but this one's a little bit way too hot.
Yeah.
Baby
Yeah.
Bear's going to burn his tongue on this one,
That's right.
So that's kind of where we came to it. So really,
Yeah.
On the US one, it really was, I'll say lackluster is probably the
Mm-hmm.
best way to put it, relatively speaking.
It was surprisingly flat, which you don't usually get with Wally Pressings. He's a very good mastering engineer, and I'm not sure what happened on this. I know a lot of people think this album wasn't very well recorded anyway.
Right. I tend to
And I
agree
think
with that.
there's some truth to that. It could definitely sound better overall. It is what it is.
Right.
But I think the UK first. I mean, you can see the results there, 9.25 across the board. I mean, it was just solid across the board, and it sounded fresh. It sounded live, not too aggressive, but punchy at the same time. And it was just really well balanced. And I think that's where, I think, you can see the Sonics average. We rated it the best. And I mean, that was just how it came out. It was just, this is the one that if I'm going to pick this up and I want to listen to it, this is the one I want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with that. It really did have that balance across the board. And I think it's kind of like for me, the 0.75 away from 10, maybe more reflection of what wasn't there in the recording itself.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's the case. And I do want to make this comment on the US one. I have never found pressings out of Jacksonville from Capitol very appealing. So maybe a Columbia Santa Maria would sound better. So I just want to throw that caveat out there because it just happened to be the one you had. But for me, I tend to find that those pressings have always seemed to be a little more underwhelming, I will say.
Yeah, which
for whatever reason.
That's one of the amazing things, right? Too, and I think something that's kind of cool about vinyl is, it can depend on what pressing plant. This is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Just little things that do matter, especially when you are going back and forth like you're able to do. I think what was really somewhat surprising to me was the results on the Abbey Road half-speed master. It was just, I mean, you can see sixes across the board. It was just dull and lifeless. And
50th anniversary. Yeah.
It was, I mean, and literally within 10 or 15 seconds, it's like, okay, I never want to hear that again, actually. Because it was that stark of a difference. It wasn't even close.
Yeah, it didn't get better anywhere. Brad and I, this became, instead of band on the run, it was listener on the run. We wanted to get away from this one it was, wow. I don't know. You could say whatever you want, veil over the speakers, lack of punch, voices muddy. I don't know. I don't know what happened. I'll just put it that way. I don't know what happened or why it happened, but, save your dough is all I can say.
Definitely.
Did you sell yours yet, by the way? Anyway.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yet.
This isn't going to help.
No, it's not. And even if you get the regular album by itself, it's, for let's say half of that, it's not worth it. It's actually more than you can probably get a UK first pressing for that's going to sound way better,
Sure.
Or even,
even 2017.
Yeah, even the 2017, which I don't know about you, but I was really surprised
Yeah,
on.
we were going hot and heavy on that one against the UK.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it was really good. I mean, and there's so much about it that we don't know in terms of the provenance there.
Right.
Um, but it was really good. Have no idea if it was analog or if it was a digital source. Don't know. But it doesn't matter because it was really good. I mean, it was definitely a contender. This to me, between that and the UK first, I'd rather have the UK first. I think it was just a little bit better, more lively,
Mhm.
fresher.
Yeah.
But that
Sure.
2017 is no slouch. So I mean, if you
No.
have that, you're probably good, unless you're just dying to have a UK first pressing. It's nice; they're
Hmm.
not too expensive.
Yeah. No, it very respectable. Very respectable.
Yeah.
And when we go through these last three areas of dynamic range, soundstage imaging, and voices, they all kind of fall together in the sense that they're fairly consistent across what they were in the mid, bass, and treble. And so, you can see the ranges there where you're in the sevens on the US and the nines for the UK, with the CBS being nines and even the 17, and then sixes again down for that last one. So your numbers pretty well just flow from there, totally.
Hmm.
So I'd say that, for my money, yeah, the UK really would be one that I would be putting my money against if I could find a good, clean one.
That's the thing: is are you going to be able to find a clean one? And it'll be more, obviously, could be more than the 30 median there. I don't know how hard it is to find one of the 2017 ones, but I can't imagine it would be that tough. Um,
And there were
you
a
know,
lot of UKs available, actually, and there were some in the US even. So that's why I put that figure there. So,
yeah,
but what's going to be available when you go look? Who knows?
yeah.
Uh, I can tell you a lot of times after these reviews, sometimes things disappear, and you go, "Okay, where was that at?"
Yeah,
So,
that's a fortunate or unfortunate side effect, depending on whether you're the buyer or the seller, I guess.
right.
Um, Now, the one that's not here, that we do have to point out, is there is a Nimbus supercut of Band on the Run, which is lots of money. Those
Cha-ching,
were
cha-ching.
very limited. I think they did maybe 1,000, and they were only available via mail order at the time. And they're, yeah. If you're a super fan of this, maybe you would try to get one of those, but it's
Super
probably
fan
going to
with
be
deep,
in the,
deep pockets. It's
yeah, with deep pockets. Yeah, but you're going to pay at
you're
least
a super
1,000,
fan of it.
but not that super.
Well, okay. Well, there you go.
But
Yeah. Well, not
but I
that
can't
deep
help but
pocket.
wonder,
Yeah.
if it was in the mix, would it be 9.75 across the board or 10 across the board? You know,
I
don't
don't
know.
know. Just, was there enough to squeeze out of it to get that? That's the thing about it. Don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
You just, I don't know. I've seen a Nimbus, but I've never heard one. So that's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, like usual, if somebody out there has one of those and you're willing to, which you probably wouldn't be, but if you were,
Yeah.
you could send it to David and we'd be
Yeah,
happy
you
to.
can, or you can come to Texas and I'll take you to dinner and we'll do the shootout together.
Even better. There you
You
go.
don't even have to let go of it physically. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that is a good one to mention. That's probably out in the stratosphere somewhere. But so somebody will say, "Why didn't you have the Nimbus?" Now we're telling you. So
Uber bucks.
yeah, but we do have the DCC CD. So let's talk about that one, Brad, if you would.
Yeah. Yeah. That was interesting. It sounded really good. I think, generally, again, I think those Steve Hoffman mastered DCC CDs are generally pretty well thought of, and this was really no exception. It sounded very good. I think if you if you have this one, and digital is your thing, I think you're set for sure. The bass and the mids were very strong. Obviously, it was quiet as quiet can get. It's CD. You don't hear anything from the background.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that the treble was not quite as strong. But David, I remember you saying something about sort of in general the way Steve masters some of these
it
things
has
that
been
may be
my
characteristic,
experience.
right?
Yeah, it has been my experience that he's on the softer side in that regard, a little tentative on the top end. So I can honestly say that I wasn't all that shocked by that, being the case. And, and characteristically, people tend to think a CD or a digital is going to be a little brighter. I mean, just generally, that's kind of a thought that people have. And it's like anything else, true sometimes, untrue other times. But I do think that Steve likes a little bit of a warmer sound on his results, vinyl or CD for that matter. I could say the same for some DCC records that I've heard as well. And so that really does, in fact, for a lot of people, that smoothness really satisfies. I tend to like a little more bite at the top end. Maybe not quite as much as the CBS Half Speed Master had on this one. That's what the dentist would call overbite. Uh, you know,
Yes.
so it needed a little orthodontic work on it, but so. But otherwise, this one pretty much is pretty nine solid, stellar, kind of right in the sweet spot. But man, that UK still just had just a little more uh, personality to it, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't go so far as I wouldn't say that the DCC sounded digital. I wouldn't say that.
No, I
Um,
agree.
to your point, I think that's something that Steve did a very good job of. Is making things kind of retaining that analog
Yeah,
flavor, if you will.
for sure.
But yeah, we put it up against the UK first because that was our winner, and we still preferred that. It was just better balance, like you said. I prefer more highs too, but not too much, and that was still the winner for us. But again, if you've got that DCC CD, it's very, very good.
Yeah, yeah, and it's within a few points of the winner. So I mean, few points and point two, like not a full point, just way in the air range of error. What do they call that? The
Yeah, within the margin of error.
margin of error,
Yeah,
the margarine of error if you're into butter, but
yeah,
the the DCC does you well. It's $55 or so, which isn't outrageous for one, because some of those can be three figures pretty easily. Definitely the vinyl can be.
for sure. Yeah, which
I,
we looked, and I don't think they ever did Band on the
no,
Run on vinyl. A lot of them they did on both, but
right,
they didn't do this album on
right.
vinyl.
They didn't at all. So the cost valuation here really, your winners, one of your lower costs, the lowest cost per point option. So and then right behind it's that 2017. So between those two, like we were saying earlier, I think it's a great job.
Yep, I think either one of those you'd be happy if you're a
Yep,
fan of this album.
I
Those are the
agree.
ones that I would say you could seek out if you don't already have one.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that 100%. Well, Brad, thank you for joining me for this. I know you're on the road and all, so safe travels as you come back to the Texas area. And we'll catch you on the next shootout, which I'm sure we're gonna have several. So we'll just we did one more that I'm not gonna leak right now, but you'll be hearing about it soon on the channel. So thanks again
Another
for your
very
time, Brad.
interesting. No,
All right,
thank you
Brad.
as always,
Thank
David.
you.
I always
Take care.
enjoy it. Thank you.
All right. Same here. See you. Take care, everybody.
Bye bye.